Okay, let's give a couple of minutes for everyone to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Valeria Carvajal, and I am Head of Operations at Oversea in the US. As we all know, our industry is evolving at an incredible pace, with new developments and policy updates emerging almost daily. Staying informed is critical for making the right operational and strategic decisions. That's why we've brought this session together. Today, I'm joined by our in-house customs broker, Sean Pryor, who will help us unpack some of the regulatory changes shaping trade and logistics right now. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning, Valeria. Thanks for having me as part of the webinar. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. So let's go over our agenda for today. We'll start with some market updates as usual on transatlantic and transpacific trades. Then we'll move on to tariff updates and how it's impacting our industry right now. And then we'll have a Q&A session for you, so you can ask anything at the end. I mean, you can ask any questions throughout the webinar, but we'll answer them at the end. Okay, perfect. Let's begin with a look at the European ocean freight market. We've seen some operational challenges at major European gateways. Average dwell times extending to 7 or 8 days at the port of Antwerp, caused by irregular vessel arrivals, alliance reshuffling, and rerouting from the Red Sea. On top of that, environmental disruptions are hitting inland transport. Drought has reduced water levels on the Rhine and Danube. This is limiting barge operations to 40-50% of capacity, and that is driving up surcharges and creating additional bottlenecks. When we look at the broader picture, structural overcapacity and economic uncertainty continue to cloud the outlook as for every trade. Even if Red Sea disruptions were to resolve, fleet growth, which is estimated at 8% annually, far outpaces demand, pointing toward continued softness in the market. Now, shifting to Trans-Pacific trade, this market remains highly reactive. Carriers are managing availability through blank sailings and service adjustments to prevent deeper falling rates. This is also reflecting how sensitive this trade is to policy volatility. U.S. container imports reached 2.5 million TEUs, up 1.6% year over year, though slightly below July's near record of 2.6 million TEUs. Year-to-date volumes are tracking 3.3% above last year. Interestingly, imports from China fell nearly 11%, with sourcing shifting toward Vietnam, Indonesia, India, Thailand. And then on capacity, carriers continue to adjust. We've seen blank sailings and even service withdrawals. For instance, MSC discontinued its Pearl service on August 1st. Additionally, new regulations from the U.S. Trade Representative, these measures are set to take effect on October 14, which will apply fees on Chinese-built and Chinese-operated vessels calling U.S. ports. To prepare for this, operators are refinancing vessels to avoid being classified as Chinese-owned, particularly moving away from their Chinese lease deals. The cost implications are significant. Drewry estimates the new fees will translate into roughly 180 or rising to as much as 340 per 40-foot containers to 2028. Carriers like CMA have already warned us that given how many vessels in the global fleet are Chinese built, these fees could disrupt service broadly. There's also industry groups, including the World Shipping Council, that have voiced concerns that the policy could increase costs and also disrupt supply chains with fewer non-Chinese alternatives. As of now, there's no indication from the administration that these tariffs will be delayed or eased, and CBP has been instructed to move forward with collection beginning October 14. That brings us to a very dynamic picture across Europe, the transatlantic and the trans-Pacific trades. Rates are soft right now, demand is uneven, and policy volatility continues to drive uncertainty as we're all experiencing. With that context, I'd like to hand it over to Sean, who will walk us through the customs compliance implications and what shippers should be preparing for in the months ahead.
Good morning and good afternoon to the people in Paris. Thanks for joining. Mid-August and early September, there was some big news and changes and updates to the tariff provisions by the Trump administration. As we all know, that on 8/11, the reciprocal tariff for China expired and then was renewed at the 10%. A week later, the reciprocal duty for EU expired and was renewed at 15%. So we had an in-transit exemption for cargo that was on the water prior to August 7th, but that's since expired. So now most folks coming out of Europe are experiencing that 15% rate, which is a flat rate. If your tariff was 2.4% for, let's say, boats, it's not 2.4 plus 15. It's going to be just a flat 15%. So the China reciprocal duty that remained at 10%, and we still have the Section 301 from the Trump administration of 2017, the fentanyl 20%, and the EPA. That's still in play. The other big news that happened with China this summer was Trump banned the de minimis entries, and then last week he banned de minimis entries from all countries. So de minimis entry is typically an air freight shipment with a low value of less than $800. It's done as a manifest Section 86 entry, primarily by companies like DHL and some of the major freight forwarders. I've been a customs house broker since 1991. I will not file a de minimis Section 86 entry. I think that if Trump had banned the de minimis entries early on, then we wouldn't have had to have the fentanyl in the containers. Obviously, a major importer with a continuous bond of $300,000 is not shipping packages of fentanyl. These are things that are generally unmanifested in a low value package. So the big news is that you can no longer order over the internet and get goods via de minimis, and you also can't ship low value sample shipments via DHL de minimis. So I have noticed there's been an uptick in low value air freight shipments. And the important thing to know with the low value air shipments is that customs has always had in place what's called an informal entry. And an informal entry is generally for goods that are valued less than $2,500. And although you need to have an importer record and an ultimate consignee, you do not need to have a bond in place. So let's say you have a foreign shipper that wants to be the importer of record. We can use their customs assign number in an informal entry, and then with the cooperation of, let's say, the customer Procter & Gamble, who's going to be the ultimate consignee, we would declare them as the EIN ultimate consignee, and no SEB would be needed, and no continuous bond would be needed. The other nice thing about an informal entry is it's not free like a de minimis entry, but the burden on the merchandise processing fee, which on a formal entry is usually $21, it's lower. So on an informal entry, it'd be $2.62. And then normally a customs entry would be less too, to try to soften the exposure on that low cost item. So big things that are happening right now are people looking for a solution to their de minimis shipments. And then the big changes with the exemptions and the addition of the aluminum and the steel. So this first slide goes to an update with the tariffs that happened last weekend. And Trump added a whole bunch of HTSs to the exemption list. The list used to be about 30 pages, and it's been expanded to about 109 pages. If you click on that QC code, it'll bring you to the Washington update on that ruling. And if you scroll down, it'll bring you to the HTS list. Before I do an entry, I always look at that list to see if we have an exemption, but it's important for the importer record to also look at that. And if you're using another broker, make sure that they're filing that entry with that exemption number. There is an Annex 3 list for an additional segment of HTSs that may be exempted, but that trade agreement hasn't been negotiated yet. So that's still in play and hasn't been decided. But if you scan that QC code, you'll see the most updated list that Trump has added, and it's anything from raw materials to like finished computer accessories. And then the other big news that happened in the last 2 weeks with Trump is, if we could go to the next slide. Oh, okay. Well, that's even bigger news. The big news is that Friday, Trump lost his appeal. So the International Trade Court, which originally had stated that these tariffs, most of the tariffs, not all of the emergency tariffs, were illegal. And Trump has lost this most recent appeal on Friday. And yesterday, the Supreme Court has agreed to fast track this, and they're going to be hearing this case in November. So all this conversation about these tariffs could be moot in the future. The unfortunate thing about the case ruling on Friday is that Grunfeld and Leibowitz, the attorneys that are representing the states and the small importers that have taken on this case, is they weren't able to get a stay on the current tariff duties. So the judge said that they're still in play till October 14th. So on October 14th, we're going to know whether or not they're going to leave them in play to the Supreme Court, or they'll have a temporary stay. So in the meantime, we need to continue to make sure that we have the right country of origin and that we're paying the right reciprocal duty. And if it's from China, that we're paying the EPA and the fentanyl. Customs is heavily, that's our last slide, enforcing the collection of these duties. I've had situations where a duty wasn't in play because we had an in transit. I had a good inbound date. I had a good arrival date. And I was not subject to, say, the 20% fentanyl or whatever it is. And then the steamship line decides to re-arrive the bill of lading. And it changes the whole thing, where now customs is looking for that duty, even though we landed that cargo in time. So for now, we're going to pay those duties. But the hope is, if the Supreme Court rules against this Trump tariff, that but the importers will be in line for these refunds. And I know Valeria has already put a lot of thought into this. And the idea is that any entries that overseas filed on your behalf, we will automatically generate a list of entries that were filed during this period and which ones will be eligible. Now, in order for us to figure out which ones are eligible, we've got to go in and do a post-summary correction to the entry. So we're not going to do that in advance of the ruling, because it's going to mess up the entry. But the hope is that in early November, we're going to get a ruling on this. And historically, the Congress has been the one in charge of tariff changes all the way back to the American Revolution. So the hope is that even though the Supreme Court was appointed by Trump, that they will rule at a constitutional level and undo some of these unfair tariffs that we didn't have planned for. In the meantime, last weekend, Trump added another element to the metal and aluminum derivative law. So if we could go to the next slide. Yeah, this one right here. Anyone that imports anything that has metal or aluminum in it, and there's a lot of items that were on that list that seem like they belong there. We've been dealing with that for a few months now. Last weekend, or about 2 weeks ago, Trump expanded the list. So if you hit these QC codes, you're going to go to the guidance that Customs issued on it. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom in blue, it's going to say additional HTSs. In the middle of the night on a Saturday, a couple weekends ago, this went into effect, and Sunday we got the guidance on it, and it was effective the next morning. And basically, this is flagging for new HTSs that could contain metal. One was of surprise to me was cosmetics. I do an entry of hand cream, and the next thing you know, it's flagging for metal. Like the last time I checked, there's no metal in hand cream. This list applies to the packaging of the product that normally wouldn't flag for metal. So if you go through this list, you'll see that, like, let's say hand cream flags for metal, but rouge doesn't. So somebody in the middle of the night decided that that probably doesn't have metal packaging. So it's a little bit random, but we need to check this list for this. And basically, until this is sorted, we need to tell Customs if we've got a tube of cream and it's in aluminum packaging, all the metal derivative rules apply. We need to tell them where the aluminum came from, what's the smelt, what's the pour, and what's the country of origin, and what's the derivative value. If we don't tell them the derivative value, then they assume a higher value for the metal, which is kind of hard when it's filled with hand cream, but that's the idea. So it would behoove everyone to scan these two lists and see if your HTS is on that, because if it is, then we need to consider that extra cost. And we also might want to consider switching the packaging from, say, metal to another material. Maybe not in time for November, but for the long term if it doesn't go well with the Supreme Court case. The slide before this is the Japan agreement. The Japanese were pushing for like free trade or 10%, and they didn't get it. They're basically like Europe. They're stuck with 15%, and there's exceptions. There's a few exceptions to the car rule. But the next slide might affect more people. Recently, Trump enacted a 25% duty on Russian oil that's sold to certain countries. So in the beginning, it was just talk. He's recently implemented it against India. So two things with India. India basically went from a 10% reciprocal to 25% reciprocal. And then also recently, a few weekends ago, Trump got mad at the prime minister there, and he added the Russian oil, which is supposed to apply to all countries that buy Russian oil, which would include Spain. Spain is not included currently, only India. And there was an in-transit exception, and that expires next week, next Wednesday. So effective next Wednesday, the Indian tariff will be the 25% plus the 25% Russian-Indian oil duty. So that's something to look out for. And then also how he's going to react to these other countries that buy oil from Russia. It seems hard to predict what's going to happen with Spain, depending upon his relationship with that government. But that's still pending. So in the meantime, it just goes back to doing the best job that we can possibly do and give the best information. And the great thing about doing business with overseas is they have a really great book of business. And I haven't seen any changes really in mids, which is great. Most forwarders and brokers have a lot of customers where they're changing the mids and they're transshipping from China to, let's say, Vietnam. I haven't seen any real country of origin changes to Vietnam, and I don't suggest doing it. Customs is really good at knowing where goods are coming from and tracking things. And we don't have a slide of it here, but Customs does have an incentive for reporting people that are transshipping, and they follow these manifests very closely. It's absolutely not a good idea. I mean, even on the situation where I mentioned where we had a good legitimate import date that was a transshipment date, they're even going back and they're questioning those. So we really want to make sure that we have, the right country of origins, the right mids, and the right values. It's your right to negotiate your cost of goods. So maybe the shipper can share in some of the duty burden, but we have to be careful about the valuation of things because we don't want to come under scrutiny of that. And just to say quickly, so that it will never happen, in the event that an importer received a request for information, whether you're the importer record in Paris or in Austin, Texas, Customs has the right to review this entry. So before it liquidates, it can go for review. And generally what Customs asks for in a request for information historically is they want a copy of the commercial invoice that shows the value and where it came from. So we need to be sure that we use the right HTS, that we didn't shop for a lower duty rate. That's one piece of it. If we have a commercial invoice that says it was $20,000 for the cost of goods and $5,000 for freight, the second piece of information they're going to ask, because you always follow the money, is they're going to ask for the wire transfer from when the importer paid for the goods. And they're going to want to make sure that you paid the right duty on that value. So always know that your commercial invoice should be aligned with your accounting department's wire transfer for those goods. And for some reason, if you're paying for cost of goods and transportation separately, make sure you always keep a record of those two wires, because that's what they're going to be looking at. Because at the end of the day, that's basically all we're doing here is we're protecting the commerce. And in this case, there's a lot of duties at stake. And we really can't have too much wiggle room with interpretation here. It's got to be, the most legitimate numbers that we can come up with. And I try to encourage the manufacturers to let the importer of records know what their cost is on the metal. I mean, everyone knows that when you make something of metal, that the value is added by the production and by the design. So to try to not give the metal value or give a higher metal value because you didn't want the customer to know it was lower doesn't help the customer. Then we're just going to be paying a higher duty rate on a feel-good number. So if there was ever a time to have real transparency here, this is it. And if this does persist, people might be interested in buying metal from America and make it part of their manufacturing process, because then we could avoid that 50% duty rate.
Right. And also, there's also, like, if there's a sudden change in HS codes, it could be also a red flag for CBP, right?
Yeah, if we have a customer that's historically been importing headphones, and now all of a sudden they want to use an 8471 number, which is like digital apparatus for a phone modem that they put on the list because they were trying to placate Apple because they're importing a lot of data modems, that's a stretch. That's definitely gonna flag in the system, in the criteria system. So maybe you imported a new product line. Maybe you were misclassifying and that's the proper classification. But if that's the case, we should probably contact the import specialist and ask for an informal ruling on that. The other thing that people can do is they can go to Cross CBP and you'll get all the importer specialist rulings. So that's where I go a lot. I go in there, I can look up ladders made of fiberglass and see if there's a ruling for any of the aluminum parts. You can do that research and look for precedent. And that's what we normally do. When we get a new customer at overseas, we look at the tariff number that we're using, and then we do a cross examination of it and see if there's a better opportunity. But at the end of the day, it's the importer's responsibility to give the right HTS number. And the problem a lot of times with the European shipments is that they're putting the European number on and not the US number. So if anyone needs the link to that, they can reach out to us later, but we really need to have the 10-digit HTS code. Because I'll give you an example. Europe might give us an HTS code for furniture that's in their stool area. But in my book, it's missing the 2 digits. And it doesn't tell me, does it go in a restaurant? Does it go into a house? Is it a children's high chair or is it a bar stool? If we use that number and it flags that it's a children's high chair, now all of a sudden we got the consumer product safety wanting to do an examination of that to make sure that the high chair is safe. Meanwhile, it's going to a bar, which might be a bigger problem. But the long and short of it is that having the right HTS number is really important. And if you don't have a 10-digit HTS number, then reach out to us and we'll help you find one. Because a lot of times the 6 and 8 just opens up a lot of questions that can't be answered unless we have a picture of the product, which we don't normally get.
Exactly. Okay, perfect. Well, that leaves us with, that's the Q&A session now. A couple of minutes we have to answer some of the questions that we have here. So the first question is, are there a lot of bottlenecks everywhere around USA due to the minimis for the express air freight shipments, small packages? What is the average delay for customs process once all the requirements are fulfilled? Go ahead, Sean.
It's my understanding that aside from the post office, that companies like DHL and TNT are no longer accepting those shipments because they have to be processed as an informal entry, and DHL just doesn't have the capacity to do that. I mean, they clear most of their shipments over in Kentucky, just south of Cincinnati, and I used to live there. They don't have the staff to handle what they bid off here. Your best bet is trying to ship it with a freight forwarder overseas and use an informal entry. With concern to bottlenecks, there are a lot of bottlenecks right now with entries with food and drug, and specifically food and drug in Chicago that also controls Detroit and some of the northern borders. Food and drug is short-staffed. They need more employees, and basically they've centralized their examination process. So recently, I had goods that were getting reviewed in Chicago for one importer. One of the FDA investigators was in Atlanta. The other one was in Puerto Rico, and they were totally overworked. I mean, they admittedly are understaffed. So I'm seeing a lot of big FDA delays out of the Midwest, and also USDA seems to be shorthanded in Newark. So it really pays to file your entries early to give customs a little time to review. And then even like today, I had entries that I filed last week. And when I called to the supervisor this morning to try to shake them loose with the USDA, they're working on a ship that arrived yesterday. I mean, that should have been worked on Friday, but they're understaffed.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next question. Is if we have imports that are packaged in aluminum, should we proactively check or only worry about if our HS code is on the list?
Okay, I think for now you only have to worry about it if it's on the list, and the list has become pretty extensive. So again, with the cosmetics, it varies between the numbers, but I would definitely take a look at it. And the packaging, when they say aluminum, is, the packaging of cream, right? That's what you're referring to, right? Nobody puts. I mean, most things are packed in cardboard or wood. Are they saying that they perhaps have like metal travel cases?
Mm-hmm. Chemicals.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
And I thought we decided that they were going to declare the value of the barrel, because right now the chemical is not flagging for it. So that would be that would be voluntary. That would be voluntary as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, perfect. Then we have another question. A cosmetic product that we have the percentage of aluminum, but not the melt origin or the value of the aluminum. So the company just adds any country and an estimated value. What would be the fee in case of an inspection? How does the administration check this data? Because as far as I know, it is not requested any certificate of origin.
Okay.
Oh, you're on mute.
Having a certificate of origin, if these tariffs stay in place, having a certificate of origin is going to be the way to go in the future, because customs is just questioning all the country of origin. So you're always good with a certificate of origin. But with concern to the metal, we can't, if we have aluminum in something and we tell customs, we declare it with a low value, whatever value you give, we have to tell it the country of origin. If we say that it was France, customs might reject it back and say there's no smelting in France. Now, I'm pretty sure there is, but on some of the countries that some of the importer records have suggested, there is no smelting facility there. So customs will I'll get a reject for it in the system, because customs knows where all these facilities are. Big brother is watching. So what we can do is we can only give them best available information, but there's no reason why the person that manufactured that shouldn't be able to give us a country of origin. Maybe if it's a mixed lot, like they've got one country and another country. I mean, I can make two declarations on the metal, but I mean, they should be able to get some sort of information. I don't want to say to make an educated guess, because we're supposed to know.
And do we have, there's no published fee, right? In case of an inspection? I think it varies.
Well, until customs liquidates the entry, then it's basically subject to change. So if customs did it, like, let's say an audit of an entry, and they said, oh, you forgot to declare the metal, typically what they do is they'd ask for it first and give us a chance to say it was a clerical error and voluntarily give the money. If they feel like it was willful intent, that we did this intentionally, then they would send a penalty notice, and we'd have to make a protest against that, why this wasn't intentional. But there is no set. Well, yeah, usually they send a penalty for like $50,000. They'll send a penalty for like 3 times the value, depending upon what government agency's involved.
Yeah.
So like I had one the other day where the transit shipment changed. One of the duties they wanted was $16,000. One of the duties they wanted for $32,000. But the notice that they sent us was just send us 50 for each. So it wasn't like in that case it was double or triple. It was just a flat fee. So then we had to write them a letter, said we voluntarily gave you this duty. The steamship line changed the arrival date. It wasn't it wasn't intentional to try to skirt the duty. And basically they mitigated the 50,000 and they just took the 16 and the 32. At the end of the day, they want their money.
Okay.
But if you're intentionally deceiving them, then we're going to have an issue.
Yeah.
And it's not a set thing. Sometimes it's to double or triple the value depending upon the scenario.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. We have 2 more questions. The first one is, just out of clarity, what are the current tariff rates for aluminum under Section 7604 from Europe? 15%. Should we declare the value of metal or the value of the transformed good?
So that base HTS rate is going to be 15%, and then we'll have to look on the aluminum and the steel HTS list to see if it flags. If it's on that list, then it's going to be 50% on the derivative metal value. And technically, if they don't declare a metal derivative value, then customs just assumes the whole thing's metal and wants to charge you 50% on the full value, which would be a mistake.
Perfect. And last question is, we import from Italy, and Italian HS codes are 8 numbers, not 10 numbers. Is that a problem the manufacturers should fix? Yeah,
it would be really great if they could, and we can send them the link to the HTS. It's really simple to deal with. But yeah, they should really put the 10-digit number on their invoice. That would be great.
Perfect.
And then any exemption number that applies, because let's say they're bringing in medical equipment. Medical equipment is free regardless of what Trump does. So in that case, we'd have whatever the HTS number is, and then for medical devices we'd have a 9817 exemption number. So it's great when those HTS numbers are on the invoice, because customs likes to see that the manufacturer, knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Okay, I found two other questions, sorry. It says, how would we look at the scope limitation that has now pharma there? And most of our HTS codes are under Annex 3 exemption. However, we use our product for cosmetics. Will it be exempt too or not?
Basically, they're saying that they have an ingredient that's on the exemption list.
Yeah.
And they want that to carry over into the finished product.
Uh-huh. That's my understanding, yes.
Well, no, I mean, if they're using like an oil in a lotion, when it gets to this country, the HTS is going to be for the lotion.
Exactly. The finished goods.
You know what I'm saying? Unless they're sending it over as a kit, with an exempted product and this product, you know what I mean? But if they're incorporating in, then if it turns into lotion, it's lotion. If it turns into rouge, it's rouge.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And the last one is, what date is the duty calculated? Sale date or entry date?
Okay, so two things with that. If you're not using U.S. currency, customs wants us to use the exchange rate of record on the market for the date of export. When the goods arrive, the release date, let's say we had goods arriving tomorrow and we cleared them today. If you have a release date of September 10th, by law, customs needs to receive the duty money and the entry summary filing, which is that 7501, within 10 business days. Now, sometimes custom systems goes down. Sometimes you need to make a change for the customer. Any change that needs to be made the day before it's due. So like, let's say something's due to customs today and the customer says, oh, I just looked at my invoice, but I don't like the HTS number. Let's use a different one. Well, I needed to know yesterday, because in order to change something that's due today, you need to change it the day before. But to answer the question, if somebody clears their goods on the 10th, we pay it to customs on the 8th day to be safe. So and that's 8 business days. So something that cleared on the 10th would be due to customs on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, would be due on the 22nd of September. Weekends don't count, and holidays.
Perfect.
So it's always good. It's always good to review your invoice and your entry summary as soon as you get it. Because if we cleared something today and we got to pay it on the 22nd, and someone says, oh, they gave us the wrong invoice, or we used the wrong HTS number, or these were all samples, we paid this duty on the last shipment. We really needed to know that before we submitted the entry summary. If we make a change after the entry summary, that's called a post-summary correction. So we can voluntarily give customs more money and change the HTS, or we can ask for a refund. That usually happens within like 30 days, and then they refund it directly to the customer.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that's it with the questions that we had. If you need additional information or have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to your sales representative at Oversea, or either Sean or me. Thank you very much for your time, and have a nice day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.